All right, so today we're going to be looking at high-stakes negotiation, but like Kissinger style.
Yeah.
Not that theoretical textbook stuff.
Exactly.
But like real-life examples from his career, like opening relations with China and navigating the Vietnam War.
Right. We'll be going through and extracting practical insights from, Kissinger, one of history's most effective deal makers, I think.
Most people would agree, yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got a ton of sources for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
Kissinger's own writings, historical analyses, even accounts from folks that worked with him directly.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're not just going to be talking about his victories. We're also going to kind of go through and dissect, some of his missteps, too.
For sure.
Because even Kissinger didn't win every single time.
Yo.
And sometimes those moments where things went sideways can be incredibly illuminating.
Yeah, okay, so the mission for this deep dive is to understand how W. Kissinger approached negotiations.
Yeah.
And give you some tools to actually use in your own life.
Right.
I mean, you might not be brokering international peace treaties.
Right.
But these principles can apply to everything from negotiating a salary to, like, getting your kids to eat their vegetables.
Absolutely. It's all about those adaptable principles.
For sure. So first things first. Kissinger was just notorious for thinking strategically. He wasn't just focused on winning a single point. He was always thinking about the whole chessboard,
That's right. He wouldn't let himself get bogged down with the small details. He was playing 3D chess while everyone else was trying to figure out checkers.
I love that. And there's this incredible example from Rhodesia in the 1970s.
Right.
Where the goal was to transition to majority rule and end the rule of the white minority.
Right.
So imagine just going straight to Ian Smith, the Rhodesian leader, and demanding he gives up power.
Oh, that was a non-starter. He had no incentive to simply agree to that.
Yeah, exactly. So Kissinger comes up with this super intricate strategy. He brings in multiple African nations, he applies pressure on South Africa, and even uses U.S. politics to his advantage.
Yeah.
It's like he set the entire table before the guests even arrived.
Right. He shaped the situation to make a deal more appealing.
Yeah.
Before they even started talking.
Yeah. So before you enter any negotiation, think bigger picture.
Zoom out.
What are your long-term goals?
Yes.
And how can you shift the dynamics?
Absolutely.
To make an agreement more likely?
It's about understanding those power dynamics, right?
Yes.
The incentives for each party, and then using that knowledge to position yourself before you even start talking terms.
Okay, which brings us to our next insight from Kissinger.
All right.
The deal-no-deal balance.
Yes.
This guy was not afraid to walk away from a bad deal.
That's right.
He constantly analyzed whether saying no was actually better than saying yes to what was on the table.
Totally. And he had the discipline to actually follow through on that as well.
Yes, and there's a couple of compelling examples of this. One with Pakistan's nuclear program.
Right.
And one concerning a potential Israeli-Jordanian disengagement.
Right.
Let's start with Pakistan.
Okay.
The U.S. was really pushing hard for them to stop developing nuclear weapons.
Right.
But Pakistan's prime minister, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, he was absolutely insistent.
He was.
He saw nuclear weapons as like the only way to guarantee their security, no matter the consequences.
Regardless of the consequences.
Yeah. So Kissinger, he recognizes that there's simply no zone of possible agreement.
Right.
So he does what any good negotiator would do.
What's that?
He cuts his losses and moves on.
Acknowledges the impasse.
Yeah. Then you have the situation between Israel and Jordan.
Okay.
Kissinger was pushing for a disengagement deal.
Right.
But he realized that the political risks for the Israeli prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, were just too high.
Yeah, too high.
And again, Kissinger shows he's willing to walk away.
Yes.
He understood that sometimes saying no is actually the smarter move.
That's right.
Even if it doesn't seem like a victory on the surface.
Totally.
And this is where Kissinger's approach gets really interesting.
Okay.
He didn't just negotiate with words.
Wow.
He understood the power of taking action.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't afraid to make bold moves away from the negotiating table to put pressure on the other side and influence their decisions.
Absolutely.
And you see this perfectly in the Vietnam War.
Right.
He and Nixon, they weren't just, at the Paris peace talks.
Right.
They orchestrated this multi-front negotiation campaign.
Wow.
They took military action. They did diplomacy with China and the Soviet Union.
Right.
And even worked to influence public opinion back home.
That's amazing.
All of this was designed to change the incentives for North Vietnam and make a negotiated settlement more attractive.
But that wasn't just talk.
Yeah.
It was a full court press.
So think outside the traditional negotiation box.
Yeah.
What actions can you take to give yourself more leverage? Or to change the other side's calculations.
Ask yourself what would happen if the deal falls through.
Yeah.
Can you improve your alternatives?
Yes.
Remember, actions often speak louder than words,
Yeah.
especially in these high-stakes negotiations.
And speaking of complexity,
Oh, yeah.
Kissinger was also a master of navigating multi-party negotiations.
Right.
Coalitions timing.
Mhm.
He really knew how to play the game.
It's like a high-stakes poker game, right?
Yes.
With multiple opponents,
Yes.
hidden cards,
Yes.
constantly shifting alliances.
Yes.
And Kissinger was the ultimate card shark.
Oh, he was a master.
Yeah.
The perfect example of this is the U.S. opening relations with China in the early 70s.
Right.
A classic case of what's called triangular diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
Kissinger was brilliant at exploiting the rift between China and the Soviet Union.
Yeah, he saw that tension,
Yeah.
and he realized that he could use it to forge a new relationship,
Yes.
which shifted the global balance of power.
It really did.
Yeah.
So what can you learn from this? In any multi-party negotiation, take the time to map out the relationships and interests of every single player.
That's right.
Look for opportunities to build coalitions. And remember, timing is everything.
Think several moves ahead, right?
Yes.
Don't just react to the moves of others.
Yeah, be proactive.
Be proactive, be strategic.
So we've talked a lot about Kissinger's big picture strategy.
Yeah.
But he also understood the importance of focusing on the individual across the table from him.
Mm.
He paid super close attention to the personalities and motivations of his counterparts.
Yeah. He believed that understanding their perspectives, their quirks, their insecurities, all of it was crucial to finding common ground.
Yeah, and making a deal. And this wasn't just some abstract theory.
Right.
He actually put this into practice.
He did.
When Nixon was about to meet Mao Zedong,
Right.
Kissinger prepared this incredibly detailed memo outlining Mao's personality, his negotiating style, even the likely topics of conversation.
Wow, talk about doing your homework.
Seriously, and he did the same thing for Zhou Enlai, giving Nixon insights into his tactical approach to negotiations and how to counter those tactics.
Yeah.
So before you walk into any negotiation, do your research.
Know your audience.
Yes.
Build rapport.
Mm.
Tailor your approach accordingly.
It's the human element that's
Yeah.
sometimes overlooked.
Totally.
And this brings us to one of Kissinger's most fascinating and perhaps controversial tactics,
Okay.
constructive ambiguity.
Yes.
He wasn't afraid to leave things a little vague,
Right.
especially if it meant getting a deal done.
I mean, sometimes a fuzzy agreement is better than no agreement at all, right?
Right.
As long as it allows everyone to save face
Yes.
and claim a win for their side.
It's the art of the diplomatic fudge.
Yeah.
A perfect example is the Middle East peace talks.
Right.
He used deliberately ambiguous language to bridge the gap between the Israeli and Arab positions. This allowed each side to walk away feeling like they had achieved something meaningful.
Right. But there's a catch here, right?
Yeah.
Ambiguity can be a double-edged sword.
For sure.
If you're just using it to paper over fundamental disagreements,
Yeah,
those issues might come back to haunt you.
absolutely.
So it's about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
using ambiguity to get a deal done,
Yes.
but not ignoring those serious underlying conflicts that need to be addressed.
Which leads us to something that many consider a potential weakness of Kissinger's approach,
What's that?
his reliance on secrecy.
Oh, right.
He and Nixon often preferred to negotiate behind closed doors,
Right.
but this had its downsides.
It did.
The SALT, talks with the Soviet Union,
Uh-huh.
all that secrecy surrounding those negotiations alienated experts in the State Department.
Right.
And it made it harder to actually implement the agreement later on.
Right. It raises a really important question about the balance between confidentiality and transparency.
Yes. When is secrecy actually necessary?
Right.
And when does it end up backfiring?
It's a tough question.
So the lesson is clear.
Yeah.
Secrecy can be a useful tool,
Mm-hmm.
but use it carefully and sparingly.
That's right.
Weigh the benefits against the potential cost of excluding key stakeholders and damaging trust.
Right. Sometimes a more open and inclusive approach can lead to agreements that are more durable in the long run.
It seems like there's a pattern emerging here.
What's that?
Negotiation is about finding that balance, that sweet spot between competing approaches.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
rarely black and white,
Yeah.
right? It's about understanding those nuances and trade-offs and making the best decision given the complexities of the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about Kissinger's strategies and tactics,
Mm-hmm.
but It's important to consider, like, the man himself, right?
Yeah.
How much of his success can we attribute to his personality?
That's a great point. Kissinger was a fascinating character, to say the least.
Oh, he was.
Known for his wit, his charm,
Yeah.
his ability to connect with people from all walks of life.
There's a great anecdote about him from the 1972 Moscow summit.
Oh, yeah.
The American photocopier had broken down.
Oh, no.
And Kissinger, knowing the KGB's reputation for, well, being everywhere, he jokingly asked the Soviet foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko,
Okay.
if he could get some copies made by holding the documents up to the chandelier.
He didn't.
He did.
What did Gromyko say?
Without missing a beat, Gromyko replied that the cameras were installed by the czars.
Oh, wow.
So they were only good for photographing people, not documents.
That's amazing.
It is.
It seems like he was able to use humor to, like, diffuse tension
Absolutely.
and build rapport, even in these really high-stakes negotiations.
Yeah, and it wasn't just humor.
Yeah.
He was also really good at putting himself in the other person's shoes, trying to understand their perspective.
Some people might call that manipulative, though, right?
Huh?
Was he genuinely empathetic, or was it just a calculated tactic?
That's a question historians still debate today.
Yeah.
Some of his counterparts, like Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, thought Kissinger was incredibly devious, always playing multiple sides.
Oh, wow.
But others, like Egyptian Foreign Minister Ismail Fahmy, felt that Kissinger's attempts at empathy were a bit too obvious.
Interesting.
Yeah, like he was laying it on thick.
So it's hard to say definitively,
It is.
but regardless of whether it was genuine or not, it seemed to work.
It did.
He was able to build these relationships
Yeah.
and get deals done.
He was a chameleon in a way,
Yeah.
adapting his personality to fit the person and the situation.
Yeah. He could be charming and witty with Mao Zedong,
Right.
serious and analytical with Leonid Brezhnev, tough but respectful with Ian Smith.
He understood that there's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to human interaction.
Okay, so personality definitely played a role in his success.
It did.
But he also had some clear tactics that he used over and over again.
He did.
We've already talked about a few, like, constructive ambiguity.
Yeah.
There are others too, right?
Absolutely. One of his signature moves was what he called shuttle diplomacy.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Instead of having everyone in the same room,
Okay.
he would fly back and forth between the different parties.
So instead of a face-to-face meeting, it's more like a high-stakes game of diplomatic ping pong.
Exactly. And this approach was particularly effective in the Middle East negotiations,
Okay.
where he would shuttle between Israel and Egypt, then Israel and Syria,
Yeah.
hammering out the details of these disengagement agreements.
Wow. So he could really control the flow of information that way?
Absolutely. He could control the flow of information reframe messages
Yeah.
and prevent those blow-ups that can happen when everyone's in the same room.
I can see how that would be helpful.
Yeah.
But it also means that the parties involved never actually get a chance to, like, build a direct relationship with each other, right?
That's true. It's another one of those trade-offs.
Right, yeah.
Another example of that need for balance.
Okay, so we've talked about strategy,
Yeah.
personality tactics. What else should we know about Kissinger's approach to negotiation?
I think one final thing that really stands out is his persistence.
Okay.
He just did not give up easily.
Oh,
He was willing to spend hours, even days, going over the tiniest details
wow.
just to find a way to move forward.
Was there ever a moment where his persistence really paid off?
There's a great story from Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin
Okay.
about the 1975 negotiations for a second disengagement agreement with Egypt. Rabin said they spent 5 hours debating a stretch of sand.
Really?
That was only 100 meters long.
Wow, talk about a test of patience.
It was, but that's what it takes sometimes.
Yeah.
Successful negotiation requires incredible stamina
Yeah.
and a willingness to stay at the table even when things get tough.
I guess you could say he had a lot of grit.
He did.
So if we had to sum up Kissinger's negotiating style in just a few words, what would they be?
I would say he was strategic, pragmatic, persistent, and always aware of the human element.
I like that.
He understood the importance of power and leverage,
Yeah.
but also the power of empathy and understanding your counterpart's perspective.
And he was never afraid to think outside the box and try new things.
He wasn't.
Shuttle diplomacy, triangular diplomacy, constructive ambiguity. He wasn't afraid to experiment.
His legacy is complicated.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt that he had a profound impact on the world of negotiation.
Yeah.
He left behind a treasure trove of lessons that are just as relevant today as they were decades ago.
It's really incredible how much of what he did back then
I know.
still applies today, even though the world has changed so much.
It speaks to the skill of a truly great negotiator.
Yeah.
The ability to adapt and evolve with the times.
But it also makes you wonder, how would Kissinger's strategies and tactics need to change to be effective in today's world?
Right.
Makes you wonder what Kissinger would even think of the world today.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Imagine him trying to navigate, negotiations with social media, blasting out every little detail.
And cyber warfare adding a whole new dimension of leverage and power.
Oh, he would totally have a field day trying to figure out how to exploit all those new tools.
But wouldn't he also face a ton of new challenges?
For sure. Like the rise of public opinion as a major force
Absolutely.
in international relations.
Back in his day, you could conduct these secret backroom deals,
Yeah.
and nobody would even know until way later.
Right.
Today, every single move is scrutinized. Yeah.
In real time.
Yeah.
So transparency and managing the media narrative
Right.
would be so important for someone like Kissinger.
He might even have to become a social media influencer.
Hey, that's hilarious.
Can you imagine?
But seriously, though, it does make you think about which of his tactics are timeless
Yeah.
and which ones are relics of a bygone era.
I think his emphasis on personal relationships would still be crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, diplomacy at its core is about human connection, right?
But wouldn't those relationships need to extend beyond just heads of state?
Oh, for sure. Engaging with civil society, building coalitions across borders, all of that would be
Yeah.
essential for tackling these global challenges like climate change.
Which brings us back to that million-dollar question.
Yeah. Would Kissinger's strategies and tactics still be effective today?
I think some definitely would.
Like what?
Strategic thinking, understanding leverage, that willingness to walk away, those are all timeless principles.
But he'd also have to adapt.
Exactly. He'd have to embrace transparency,
Hmm.
master the art of public diplomacy, and recognize the power of networks and coalitions.
Well, I think this deep dive has given us all a lot to consider.
I think so, too.
We've learned about Kissinger's successes, his failures,
Right.
the core principles that guided his approach to negotiation.
We've also explored how his personality played a role.
Yeah.
And, the importance of understanding your counterpart's perspective and building those strong relationships.
But the question remains, how relevant are Kissinger's methods in today's world?
Right. What would he have to change to adapt to our increasingly complex and, interconnected global landscape?
It's definitely something for all of us to think about.
As you navigate your own negotiations, whether it's in your personal life or in the professional arena, remember the lessons we've discussed today.
Think strategically,
Yes.
understand the power dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
and never be afraid to walk away from a bad deal.
And most importantly, never stop learning and adapting.
Yeah.
The world of negotiation is constantly evolving,
Mm-hmm.
so the best negotiators are the ones who are always willing to learn and grow.
That's some great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Henry Kissinger.
Of course.
We hope you found it insightful and helpful.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.